What's going on, guys? Welcome back to BossBytes episode 12. I'm Sam Bizak of BossStrength.com, and today I'm going to be talking about how I build effective workouts. So, a lot of people just go into the gym, pick a body part they want to work on and just, do whatever exercise that they think they should be doing for that specific body part. And while there's nothing wrong with that, I like to take a little bit more of a cerebral approach and, give my training specific purpose. And this is something that I also like to do for all of my clients. I think that the specific exercise structure and order and purpose of whatever workout you're doing should be thought about ahead of time if you are really hoping to actually improve with whatever your goal is for specifically exercising. So without further ado, I just want to get into all of the strategies and techniques that I use when building workouts so that you can use it when you're building things for your own training program. So obviously the first thing that I like to do is decide specifically on which muscle groups I want to work on. Do I want to specifically work on legs? Do I want to work on back? Do I want to work on shoulders or chest or arms or whatnot? And then I usually like to take it a little bit further. So I like to, for example, with leg training is probably my favorite just because it's really difficult and I always feel really satisfied. Plus, I really want to have a great set of legs. So when I'm specifically picking those muscle groups, you have to realize that there's like a bunch of different smaller muscle groups within the legs that actually make up the legs. And just for simplicity's sake, I want to talk specifically about quads, hamstrings, and calves. So, it's pretty straightforward. Whenever I decide that I'm going to do legs, I like to then go a step further and decide, what's my primary focus? Is my primary focus on training specifically for my quads? Am I trying to build up my glutes? Am I trying to build up my lower hamstrings? And do I want to, focus it all on my calves? And that's, something that can just take your training a little bit further when you start to really think about, specific movements being tailored specifically to certain aspects of muscle. Certain exercises will probably hit quads more than they will hamstrings and vice versa. And that's something that I like to think about ahead of time just to ensure that I'm, putting the necessary stress on both muscle groups enough to build them to the extent that I want to build them. From there, after I've decided on the specific muscle groups and then the specific subsets of those muscle groups that I want to work on, I also then recommend that you try and determine what your primary focus of the training session will be. And by that I mean, are you training specifically to improve strength? Are you training to improve fatigue resistance? Are you training with the specific intent of increasing muscle size? This is all really important to consider because as some recent research has been shown by Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, in a recent research manuscript that he co-authored, they determined that specifically building muscle size, you can do that with a wide range of reps and sets. Many people had always considered, rep ranges of 8 to 12 to be like sort of the bread and butter of specifically increasing the size of muscle. And while those rep ranges may certainly be optimal for that intended result, this research determined that you can build an appreciable amount of muscle using just about any rep range as long as you're taking those rep ranges close to failure. However, when you have a specific purpose of increasing strength or increasing fatigue resistance, even though you can still build muscle in a bunch of different rep ranges, it turns out that it seems that you need to train in specific rep ranges if you have a specific intended result. For example, if you're specifically trying to increase strength, it makes perfect sense that you would want to train in a lower rep range because, what is strength? That's, having a really fast and frequent message being sent from your brain to your muscle, a lot of muscle fibers contracting simultaneously in coordination with each other. You're essentially attempting to be able to overcome the inertia of the weight that you're lifting. And if you're lifting, 30% of your 1 rep max for for 30 repetitions, that's not exactly conducive to being able to produce a high amount of power and force rapidly. Whereas if you're training with heavier weights often, that will probably become one of the primary adaptations. And the same goes in the opposite direction too. If you're training in rep ranges of 2 to 4 or 2 to 6, you shouldn't expect that if your sets are lasting longer than a minute long, like if you were doing a strength endurance workout, you wouldn't expect that those strength training days would translate very well to helping you become more fatigue resistant. So you have to specifically think about like what's the primary focus and purpose of your training session, so that way you're training in rep ranges that are actually conducive to the goal that you actually desire. So after deciding on the specific body part and the specific focus, then I like to work by specifically deciding on what movement type do I want to use for the day. So continuing with this whole leg example, this is something like if I'm deciding whether or not I want to back squat, if I want to front squat, or if I want to leg press. And this decision is largely based on both how I feel, how confident I am, as well as like what my previous training sessions were like. If I'm trying to be well-rounded and, specifically increase muscle size as well as strength and strength endurance, I want to be training in a wide range of rep ranges, but I also want to be training with a wide array of different exercises. Now that's what I'm trying to explain is different from this idea of muscle confusion. Okay, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about picking, 3 or 4 specific exercises that I know will be beneficial for me, which, with regards to my goal, and then I sort of rotate them. I don't, say like, oh, I, did squats and now I'm never going to do squats again, or I'm going to wait a month. No, I'm saying I like to base my current training session off of my last one, so that way I know that I'm manipulating my training variables enough. So for example, if I back squatted 2 days ago, maybe I'll back squat again, but chances are I'll want to focus primarily on leg pressing. Or let's say today I'm extremely fatigued and I was thinking about squatting, but I know that my squats will be subpar. I might swap in leg press instead of that, just to accommodate the fact that like my motivation isn't really high, which, a lot of people like to think about themselves as robots and that they just go into the gym. But it's like, if you don't want to squat today, you can certainly do other leg focus exercises that maybe you'll put forth greater effort towards. So deciding on the specific movement types and kind of, building the rest of the workout around that is my next choice, and it's something that I suggest that you do as well. You don't always have to squat. Of course, squatting is a fantastic mass and strength builder, but it's not the only exercise. And on occasion, mixing in other types of movements is probably a good thing. So from then, after deciding on the specific focus, the body parts, and what sort of workout I'm going to be having, I also then like to set my reps and sets. So reps and sets are largely, I determine that based on the idea of progressive overload, this idea that over time you want to, progressively increase the amount of stress that you're placing on yourself. And that can come via, adjusting the exercises that you're using, increasing the reps per set, increasing the sets that you complete per day or per week, or some combination of all of them. But it's also really important to point out that, like as I mentioned earlier, if you're training for a specific focus, the amount of reps and sets that you're doing is relevant. If you're training specifically for strength, most of your training sets will probably, be of a lower rep range, but higher intensity. That's different from if I have a power focus workout and I want to do, 10 sets of 3. That's, doing sets of 3 with a reduced amount of weight is a lot different than me saying like, oh, I'm going to do 3 reps today on the deadlift. Obviously, if I'm doing, 3 reps on the deadlift and I've got, 400 plus pounds on the bar, I'm probably not going to do 8 or 9 sets. But if I'm doing, a training session specifically to increase my power when deadlifting, and I'm doing sets of 3, but I'm using, 300 pounds, I might be able to increase the reps that I'm doing. I just want to point out that the amount of repetitions and sets that you're doing is relative to your primary focus. Because in order to practice progressive overload, you're going to have to manipulate those things. And then lastly, what I like to do is I like to go and test it out. One of the major issues that I've found with program building is that I like to overestimate what everybody can do, including myself. You think about making workouts and you're like, oh, I want to build this badass workout that, is going to take me from 0 to 100 overnight. And the truth is that it never pans out that way. Almost all the time when I build a standalone training program, thinking long term, I almost always overestimate how much work you should be doing per workout. If I'm training legs, I'll have these like delusions of grandeur that I want to do, 5 sets for 5 different exercises all at once. And usually it never pans out that way. And it's something that I suggest you do as well, is when you're building training programs for yourself, you have to go and try them out to make sure that you're not, lying to yourself. For me, I like to lie to myself by thinking I can do way more than I can. And then I get into the gym and I've done, 6 sets of squats and I'm like, holy shit, I feel like crap now, but I still have 5 more exercises programmed. It just doesn't really pan out and then I have to adjust. But that's something that you can pay attention to as well when you're building your own training programs, like how well are you accurately assessing your ability? And, that can eventually translate into how you're prescribing workouts for somebody else in the future if you decide that that's a route that you want to go down. So I think that about wraps it up with this. I just wanted to, give an idea of my thought process when I'm building training programs. I think a lot of people just kind of go to the gym just to exercise, and that's totally fine if that's like something that you want to do. I'm totally cool with that. I think it's great if you're exercising regardless of what you're doing. But if you have specific goals and specific, milestones that you hope to reach and achieve, you definitely need to take a more cerebral approach and make sure that you're building workouts that will actually, be effective and can actually help you progress. So I think that about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed this content or if you have, comments, please consider commenting below and tell me what you do when you build a training program. What do you like? What is your thought process when you're doing it? And, even what are some criticisms that you have of this style of program building? Do you think that there's something I'm missing? Do you think that there's something that could definitely benefit me as well as people that I build training programs for? I want to hear it. But again, if you enjoyed this content, please consider giving this video, or if you're watching the podcast, giving the audio version a like. And if you really, really enjoyed this content, please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel as well as the podcast. So that wraps it up for today, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.